Welcome back to Be the Change podcast with me, Stephanie Howlett, CEO of Diversity NL. Have a listen as we explore real life, vulnerable topics on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Become awakened, create culture of inclusion, be brave, have impact by being an ally. Explore how you can be the change that you always wanted to be. We respectfully acknowledge the territory in which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, and the island of Uktamaguk as the ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq and Beothuk. We'd like to recognize the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and Nunatukavut and the Innu of Nitassinan and their ancestors as the original people of Labrador. We open our hearts and minds as we strive for respectful relationships with all First Peoples of this province. We search for collective healing and true reconciliation as we honor this beautiful land together and commit ourselves to being stewards who will respect the cultures, traditions, and ceremonies of all who call it home.
Welcome back to Be the Change podcast by Diversity NL. We have a special guest with us today, the fantastic, fabulous Alison Butler. Alison and I would have met, trying to think how we would have met. I know we connected on LinkedIn. We've just did a fantastic course at the Gardner Center together, all about mental health and welcoming environments. A little bit about you. So you're a mom, you're a mental health advocate with lived experience in mental health that came to light in your 30s as a working professional. We're going to talk a little bit about that, which is very interesting. And then you went into being your focus, I guess, on well-being, stress management, burnout, prevention, which is just, work-life balance. All that is so interesting to me because I think we've all gone through periods in our lives wanting to, I think, with the mental health piece and keeping life in check. So you have a certification in mental health first aid, and you're a trainer through the Mental Health Commission of Canada, and you teach courses, I know, virtually and across Canada. And you also hold a master's in employee relations through Memorial and 17 years of experience training and speaking. So fantastic to have you with us today. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I'm excited to chat.
Absolutely. So tell me, I guess, a little bit about your starting your own business, kind of where that came from, the ideas of that, which is always interesting.
Yeah, so I've always had, I guess, entrepreneurial threads in my life. Even from when I was an undergraduate student in university, I sort of had businesses that I was dabbling in. And I've done many creative pursuits over the years. So that was kind of in my blood, I guess, although I don't come from an entrepreneurial family. So I always find that really interesting. But I started my business officially, this version of the business as it is, in 2019. And it came after I loved my job before. I had a 9 to 5-ish job in a very busy local nonprofit, and I loved it. Anyone who knows me from that time would have said, Alison's very passionate about her work. I was out there speaking and training, doing all this work that I still do in workplaces. But something happened. And I really started to not feel well. And I didn't understand why. I just knew I didn't feel good. And now, when I speak and talk about it, I'll often just say, I felt really blah. I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling of blah. It was very hard to kind of pinpoint what that was. But if we're to kind of unpack it a little bit, really tired, no energy, really irritable, feeling physically unwell, but like not being able to say it's this, and that was sort of the beginning of the journey. And I went through all kinds of medical visits. I was very proactive. I was like, hey, can somebody tell me what's going on here? I don't feel like a great version of myself. There has to be something. And everyone was telling me I was great. You're good. You're physically good. The physical tests were coming back as being like, you're okay. And I knew I wasn't, though. So I really listened to sort of that inner self knowing of there's something not right here. And eventually, I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety. And I think that really comes from a period of being burned out as well. I'm a self-proclaimed very high achiever, always had my hands in a million pots, and I loved that. I loved being creative. I loved doing lots of things. And people were saying to me, like, you're trying to do too much, you're busy. But that had always felt like my norm until suddenly it wasn't anymore, And I knew almost right away when, those words were said to me, didn't see it coming, like flabbergasted. Had never I think I always thought I understood mental health. I thought, I'm well educated. I get this. I didn't get it at all. Until I really experienced it for myself. And then that was kind of a really big wake up call. And I knew almost right away, I know this is a long-winded story to how I've started my business, but I knew almost right away that I wanted to use my platform, as someone who was comfortable being up in front of people, talking, training, being on stages. I knew I wanted to talk about mental health. So that was sort of that first glimmer of, I need to do something with this. This feels like my life purpose. And the business was created from that. So I went looking I knew I could talk about my own experiences, which I do. But I also wanted something else to go with that. Some practical skills. And I went looking, what kinds of programs are out there. And I found mental health first aid, and it felt like a really good fit. And that was sort of the beginning of my business journey. I certified as a trainer and never looked back, really.
Awesome. So you found your passion in something that I guess came from within, wanting to have that impact, I guess, on others. So you can share, I guess, your journey, your experience in real time in a training setting.
I really remember thinking very clearly, hold on, if I'm, this professional working person who's out there every day, interacting with people, doing stuff I love, if I, and I went to university for, I don't know how many years, a lot, and I thought to myself, okay, but here I am. And I didn't recognize what was happening to me as even being a potential mental health thing. Mm-hmm. I didn't recognize the signs because the way my signs were, it wasn't like what I connected to be that stereotypical thing with mental health.
Right.
And I didn't see it. And I thought, okay, wait, if I didn't see this, how many other people are out there that are not seeing this? And that really drove that passion. Like, I want to be able to create change. And it's for people to be able to recognize their own mental health and do something about it. And it's also really now, it's really about in workplaces being able to be comfortable with mental health, talking about mental health, accepting of mental health, and potentially even being able to recognize, signs in others and being able to support others when they may not recognize it for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's huge. I mean, I think everyone that's listening probably has gone through some sort of stressor or break or mental health. I know I have, and I've had to step back at times in workplaces. Take some time off, take a bit of leave, rejuvenate, find out what it is, kind of reconnect, do my grounding, what that is for me. So let's talk about a few signs of if people aren't feeling or they got that blah. Like, let's talk about a few signs and symptoms that might be happening, what that looks like. I'm technical meaning, right? Blah.
I know. And I love taking things to what I call real talk, right?
Yeah.
I don't come from a medical background, so like, let's take all that out of it. The first thing that I do want to say is that there are so many different signs and it can really look different from person to person. So I think that's really important to recognize, just because we all have an individual brain and our brains are processing and, doing things differently. And so it's going to show up differently for each person. With that being said, there are some very common signs, and I exhibited a lot of them. I just wasn't aware at the time. And I also just want everyone to recognize, when I talk about mental health, for me, it's, how do we support ourselves and each other through life stuff? And when I train, I talk about stuff a lot because we've all, as you mentioned, gone through stuff. It doesn't necessarily have to be a mental health, diagnosis, mental health illness. It's stress, overwhelm, grief, sadness, loss. I'm having a bad day. It's this whole spectrum of being a human being. So we're going to see ourselves in some of these signs regardless, but I just want people to understand, we all go through this. So that's really important. Okay. Few signs to think about. And like I said, I had a lot of them. Changes in mood. And that can look like a lot of different things. I always associated it with sadness, right? Or feeling really down. And that is the reality for some people, for a lot of people. Interestingly, it wasn't one of my symptoms, which I'm kind of grateful for, because I think it was a big that particular piece, I think, was a very big catalyst of me going, oh, wait, this doesn't necessarily look the way that the media portrays or that I've always kind of stereotypically thought of this. But changes in mood, feeling great, feeling not so great. Anger and irritability are ones that come up a lot. I know for me in training, we talk about anger a lot. So that seems to be a really common one when I sit in rooms, in workplaces, and people talk about, changes in someone's behavior, like these angry outbursts or responding to someone in anger when that's not really maybe someone's typical behavior. I often, now that I do this work all the time, I often think of anger as like a little clue. There's probably something else going on there. Irritability was one of mine. My doctor very eloquently described it to me as little things feel like big things. And I thought that was really profound. Just this, like, I often found myself feeling like, why am I reacting this way? Like, this doesn't feel like my normal, but yet here I am feeling these feelings and kind of having this response to whatever it was. Something that rationally I was kind of thinking, well, this isn't a big deal, but yet I seem to be making it one. You're smiling. So those are big ones. Often like fatigue, tiredness, low energy can be a big sign. I do want everyone to keep in mind that fatigue and tiredness can also be signs and symptoms of so many other things. Physical health things as well. So, but it's enough to be aware of like, I feel like I'm dragging through my day all the time. I just don't seem to have this motivation. I wonder what could be causing that. And for me, I've gone through periods of like, oh, it's a diagnosis, or, oh, my iron is actually really low. There's all these things that can contribute there, but that's a big one. Changes in motivation too. I think when we talk about like school or in workplaces, a lot of people will describe to me, just because I talk to so many people about their mental health, and I hear a lot of stories for a lot of people. Sometimes there tend to be some common threads, even though it looks different for everyone. A lot of people will kind of describe this like numbness of like, so you could call that lack of motivation. You could kind of call it like not seeming to care. I think for me personally on my journey, that numbness was sort of like, I just can't be bothered right now. So that can show up in our work and personal lives in a lot of different ways. Another one that I hear a lot, canceling plans. Like I have really great intentions. I want to go hang out with my friends or my family, but like, oh no, in this moment, I can't. And people sometimes, very often don't want to admit that or don't even recognize it. So it looks like, yeah, hey, I'm going to be there. I'm going to show up. And then at the last minute, I'm not coming. Mm. I hear that one a lot. And I think it's quite common. And I've certainly seen that, in my personal life with people that I know as well. Some people have panic attacks. There's so many different ways that it can look, but those are some, signs that tend to be pretty common.
Right. And any thoughts about how people can, if it's not medication related and you don't need that physician and that piece of it, if it's not to that point, how can we, I call it grounding. How do we, for some tips, techniques, some different things that we can do to help ourselves when we find ourselves in those moments of the blahs, the irritabilities, those sorts of things, because we're hard on ourselves. I think we're hardest on ourselves than what anyone else will be, right? Like we don't forgive ourselves, for that one thing we do wrong or one thing that we think we don't do wrong or we've done wrong. We kind of beat ourselves up over that. A lot of us, different personality, probably A types, overachievers. Any thoughts about that?
Yes, I have many thoughts on this. And I will say, I am 1000% still a work in progress. This is something that I still work on every day. There is no magical solution. But I think intention of looking after ourselves is very, very important. And I'm not perfect at it, and I talk about this all the time. As you mentioned in the intro, I'm doing a lot of burnout work right now. And burnout and depression and it's all under this mental health umbrella because there's so many similarities and a lot of people don't realize that. I think as a society, we're not allowing ourselves adequate and appropriate time to rest and take breaks. I think this is huge. We live in a world, and I did a post about this recently, we live in a world that's like, go, 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 go. We feel like if we're not being quote unquote productive 24/7, we're lazy, there's something wrong with us. All of the science shows that taking breaks, having rest allows us to be, well, our brains at least, to be more productive, more creative. But I'm not seeing that play out for most of us in the world of work. I think we have a long way to go there. And some of it's the workplace, and some of it is individuals, right? Hi, my name is Alison. I'm a high achiever. And it's been a real work in progress for me to teach myself it's okay to stop for a minute and rest. I'm getting a lot better at it now in the last few years. But interestingly, it took that diagnosis. And I don't want people to have to get to that point, If you're there, cool. But, it's like I shifted my whole life because I realized, okay, this is not working. So rest and breaks, really important. For me personally, moving, so like getting outside, walking, moving my body in some kind of way. I also do yoga and teach some yoga as well. It comes back to the rest equation though. Taking the time to do something that kind of calms my body and my mind has been really, really powerful. I find now for myself that if I start to feel anxious, if I start to feel overwhelmed, it can still be hard to do sometimes, but I will be like, okay, I have to walk. I'll say like, I got to walk it off or walk it out. And I will go, for me, I find my sweet spot is about 5,000 steps if I track it, or like 45 minutes to an hour. I'm very interested in this, right? I'm like, at what point does it take me to like calm my, system?
Yeah.
And it's so simple. Like, I think we all know this stuff. We know exercise is good for us. We know it's good to drink water. We know. But it's the doing. And it's so easy to say to ourselves, I'll get to that later. And I still do it all the time. It's still an ongoing inner battle for me of like, no, you need to go right now. Just this process of, I know that this will help, but I'm too busy to do it. So the rest, the movement are two huge ones for me if people are feeling like, okay, maybe I'm having milder symptoms. And I think as well, I'm a huge advocate for, I take medication. I'm very open about that. I've been on a journey where I've been taking it, where I've not been taking it. I've kind of experimented. For me personally, it works really well. And I decided, hey, like, why do I need to be fighting an uphill battle right now when I know that I just feel better taking the medication? And that's kind of where I've settled. Mm-hmm. But not everyone needs medication, but some people do. And I think really it's about paying attention to ourselves. And I think a lot of us are not good at that. We ignore how we feel. We just try to push through. And to be able to listen and go, okay, do I need a break? Am I taking it? If I walk, if I go outside, do I feel better? And then if you're doing some of those things and the symptoms are still persisting, then I would say, go and talk to someone, right? Pay attention to those things. Because otherwise we're going through life. I was going through life. I always call it like I was going through the motions, I was getting up. I was looking after my kids. I was going to work. I was coming home. Repeat. But I wasn't a good version of myself. Right. It's like I was going through the motions of life. And I think I've made a lot of changes in my own life so that I'm not just going through the motions. And the thing that makes me the most joyful is seeing other people make changes so they're not just going through the motions. I actually feel like I'm getting a little emotional right now because otherwise what's the point,
Mm-hmm. You talk rest. So I want to talk rest because everyone's version of rest is different. So is it sat back with your favorite TV show and your lazy boy, or sat on the couch with your person or your pet or your whatever? Like there's different versions of rest. So if we can explore that a little bit, and it is emotional, by the way, because this is your journey of what you've had to do, which I think will be very impactful when other people hear it, because there's bits and pieces of your journey that I say, yeah, I've been there. I've felt that. I've done these things. And you're right. Like it's the 45-minute is the sweet spot, because when I'm in nature and we walk with our dogs, that I can feel this pulsating in my body that feels like now I'm relaxed, I'm chill, if that makes sense. You just feels, but it is, you need to go for a certain period of time before you feel that, because just going for 5 minutes is nothing. But like when you do that, or yoga, or whatever works for us, you can actually feel it within your body. It's almost like everything starts cooling, like your whole system starts kind of cooling down. I'm going to call it, I don't know.
You're calming your nervous system, basically.
Yeah, for sure. So you start feeling better, and then you start getting these really cool endorphins and I think that's why we exercise. It's because to make us feel better, right? It's a piece of it. Same as when we're eating different foods, you feel afterwards. Those bag of potato chips, you don't feel better afterwards. You don't in the moment when you're having it. You do. Afterwards, you certainly don't, right? A lot of foods.
Love a chip. Yeah.
Loves a chip too, right? I know it too much so. But, all these things, what helps us, right? Like, so let's talk about rest, what that looks like. Different versions of rest, because we talked before we got on about, I think there's 7 different types of rest, which I'm interested in learning more about.
I'm so not going to be able to name all 7 of them now.
Let's talk a couple. Yeah.
And I do want to say too, just to that comment, because I like people to recognize, I'm in a good place now. Well, most days, right? I'm in a pretty good place. But I haven't always been in a good place. And I want people to recognize, we're here I'm talking about my 5,000 steps and walking for an hour and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm able to do that now. But I also want people to recognize that if you're not in a great place right now, that like even walking out the door can feel like what I call a mental mountain. Like, this is impossible. And I think that's hard for people to understand unless you're in that place. And I willingly will say I have 1,000,001 excuses. And so like even now when I'm not in a good place, it's like, no, I don't need to, I don't want to, whatever. And so I just want people to recognize that taking these actions is not always easy. In fact, taking these actions can sometimes feel like the hardest thing in the world. And I know that because I've been there. And so sometimes even the act, and we talk about this sometimes in training, the act of opening up your door and stepping outside, if that's where you're at, do it. I have conversations in busy workplaces sometimes where people are like, I am really struggling to get away from my desk, but what I did was I walked down 3 flights of stairs, I opened the office door, and I stood outside, and then I went back up. Like, meet yourself where you are. I just wanted to like really highlight that, but let's talk about rest. So rest looks different for different people, and I think we need different types of rest depending on where we are. So when we think about rest, physical rest, okay, sleep is one. So many people that I meet don't sleep enough, right? And why? Because we're busy. We don't have time to sleep. I am self-admittedly the queen of sleep. Like I love sleep. But I know for myself that when I start to get run down, if I'm starting to feel tired, stressed, overwhelmed, I know that sleep will be a helpful piece in that equation. But then you actually have to do it, right? I have to go to bed earlier. I have to shut off my screens. Or I'm also the queen of sleeping in, and I love it, and I do not apologize for it, right? So like not feeling guilty about the type of rest that you need. But physical rest doesn't just have to be sleep, right? It can be gentle movement, like walking. It can be yin yoga, like I do, right? Really calming, slow movement. So that's one. And I do think that piece is kind of important for everyone. Creative rest. What does that look like? Looks really different for different people, right? For some people, it's art. For some people, I don't know. What do you have? Do you have anything creative that you enjoy doing?
Um, I've done a little bit of art at times. I'm not great at it. I'm
Okay.
hoping to take a pottery class because I do want to get more, a little bit more creative. That's something we've looked into and had to cancel because we had snowstorm. Haven't gone back to rebook it, so I don't know. I don't know if I'm that interested in it. Then I don't know.
Like, I think reading could be creative rest.
Yeah,
Um, like anything that's doing this kind of like filling your own cup, I
yes,
guess. We could
yeah.
probably even argue that like travel could be creative rest, like learning and exploring new things.
Oh, I love that one. Yes,
Yeah, see?
100% there.
Yeah, I do. Social rest. Now, this is interesting because it also comes back to like knowing yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm what I call, I don't think this is actually any kind of a technical term, but I call myself an extroverted introvert.
Mm-hmm.
So I, by nature, am very introverted. People who meet me have a very difficult time understanding this because they see shiny stage Alison, usually, right? They see professional public speaking Alison. And I love it. I love that work. But my rest comes from quiet, being alone, inner reflection. So I know that about myself. So it's like finding the balance between the two. Some people actually rejuvenate or fill their cup from being around other people. So maybe having too much quiet or solitude is not good if you're, filling your energy from being around people. So like knowing those things is so, so important. And I try to find a good balance of both. For me, sometimes it's like, making the time to sit down and have a cup of coffee with another business owner or another like-minded person really fills my cup. Having deep, meaningful conversations for me really fills my cup. I don't want to talk to you about the weather. That's just not my personality. So like that can actually be rest. Yeah. So I think there's just so many different pieces of this. And interestingly, when I train, in mental health first aid, for example, when we're having conversations about this, what does it look like? Leaders and managers, right? Everyone has their own style. Some people say, yeah, well, when I rest on my break, I want to walk down the hall and go to a break room and chit chat with people. Other people will say like, I have people coming to me 24/7. Sometimes I just need to close my door if you have one. Some people don't have one. And just, kind of sit in my chair and stare at the ceiling and think and process for 10 or 15 minutes. But like, are we allowing ourselves to do that? Like if I worked in an office environment and I walked down the hall and I see Stephanie sitting in, your chair staring at the ceiling, what do I think to myself about that? Oh, Stephanie's resting. Great. Probably not. You know what I mean? So like, it's like our culture doesn't value rest. And I'm on a mission to change that.
Yeah, well, that's great because our culture doesn't value rest. And I think since I've become a business owner, I value things and look at things completely differently now than what I ever did when I was at different cultures and different workplaces. It looks different because I value the rest. I value the travel. I value conversations one-on-one, but I know too, like you, I'm probably somewhere between introvert, extrovert. Yeah. So just knowing yourself where that's too is tremendously important. Exploring who you are and what does fill your cup.
For rest and reflection if we don't have that self-awareness about ourselves, if we don't have that space to think, who am I?
Mm-hmm.
What do I need? We need that rest and reflection to get there. It's interesting.
It is. And I think as we age as well, we need probably different things as well. It looks different, like the different generations of what different age groups, what different people need, and allowing that as managers and leaders, looking at that.
Ooh, yes, that's so powerful. I'm a completely different person than I was when I was 20. And I think I'm a completely different person than I was when I was in my 30s. I've been on this, huge mental health journey. But even the things I enjoyed, like creatively, things that I did 20 years ago are not necessarily things that I'm interested in doing now. So being able to explore that often when I start training sessions, I'll go around and I will ask people, tell me your name, where you're from, and something you do for fun. And Stephanie, so many people really struggle with answering that question.
Mm-hmm.
And I find often women struggle more with answering that question.
Right.
And I think mothers often struggle more with answering that question, because more often than I would like, I just sort of get the response of like, oh, I drive my kids around to all of their activities.
Mm.
And I'm kind of on a mission to work on that too, Or I also, just because I tend to train a lot of leaders and managers, I often get people, parents in particular, men and women, who have, more adult children now, or who have children who've kind of recently moved out and are sort of in this phase of like, I just spent 20 years of my life focused on my children, and I actually don't have a clue. So that's a real thing. And if anyone's resonating with that, I'm hearing that all the time of like, oh yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah. And I'm sure people struggle with who they are all the time, because if the kids are the center of your universe, and is getting back to explore coupleship, what that means as a couple, what that means as an individual. And we don't always look at ourselves. Like, how do we be the better version of ourselves for us, for our kids, for people around us? And that's a struggle that a lot of us have. Like, what does that look like?
I feel like we could do a whole separate episode where I just talked about that.
And we might, right? 100%.
And I think too, just to kind of clue that up, because I have been talking about rest a lot. I want anyone who's listening to be able to recognize that we deserve to rest. Like, that should be a fundamental part of who we are. To be able to rest, whatever that looks like for you, or whatever feels good for you, and to not feel guilty about that. Because, as we've spoken about, rest is such an important part of work-life balance, our mental well-being, not being burned out. And there's that expression that always goes around, like, you have to look after your wellness or you'll be forced to look after your illness, or, something along those lines. We've probably all heard it, and I don't think very many people pay attention to it, but it applies to mental and physical health, right? It's like we're just going on until something goes wrong, and then we're like forced to look it in the face. But why not, have a better version of your life all the time?
Absolutely. We're coming to the end of our fantastic podcast with you. Some final closing words or sentiments.
Ooh. Probably should have thought this out before. I think just recognize, well, I probably just said it before I even meant to, we deserve to feel like a good version of ourselves. And if you're listening and you don't feel like you're there, What's one small, tiny step that you could put into place right now that might put you 1% towards feeling like a better version of you? And it's not an overnight fix. Like I said, this is something that I continue to work on every single day. It's an intention. Okay. I'm going to feel, I want to feel like a great version of myself today. And not every day is perfect. I have days where I'm like, well, that didn't go according to plan, but it's like getting up the next day and having that intention, right? Like I'm working on myself. Yeah. So I think the big thing that I want to leave is like, you deserve to feel like a great version of yourself.
Through intention, through rest, through getting to know what fills your cup.
Yeah.
Awesome. So if people want to connect in with you, want to book sessions with you, how can they reach you?
Well, there's lots of ways. I won't share them all. I am very active on LinkedIn, so I always invite connections there. You can find me, Alison Butler, and 1 L in Alison. And I also have all of my information online on my website, which is also my name, alisonbutler.ca. And you can find out about mental health first aid, about workshops, speaking in workplaces, or how you can work with me. If anyone is so inclined and really wants to rest, I have a retreat in Costa Rica coming up in April. So, maybe that's something that people want to get on board with. So I love connecting. I love hearing from people. So if you're listening to this and we're not always connected, please connect in some way. And I look forward to chatting with you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being with us today. Comment below, subscribe, connect with me at Stephanie@diversitynl.com or on LinkedIn. Be the change.